What's behind the assault on American democracy? Hello, I'm Nathan King, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Hello again. Discussion about threats to the stability of the US political system and the country's domestic security is becoming more and more commonplace among commentators, analysts and voters. But political parties continue to trade accusations about election fraud and voter suppression. And then, of course, there's the January 6th assault on the US Capitol, on the FBI search at Mar-a-Lago, former President Trump's Florida home. Some Republicans have called for defunding of the FBI, while pro-Trump conspiracy theorists issue explicit or thinly veiled threats for violence. Is it simply politics as usual at Volume 10, or an assault on American democracy? There's a lot to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. Rossi is a former assistant US attorney and federal prosecutor and friend of the show. Rina Shah is a political strategist and commentator. Also with us is Craig Shirley. He's a best-selling author and US presidential historian. And Frank Sesno served as CNN's Washington bureau chief. He's currently director of strategic initiatives at George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs. And I'm going to start with you, Frank, largely because you were one of my heroes when I first moved to Washington, D.C., in a calm and news environment where facts reigned. Do you remember those days? Well, anyway, let's set the scene for us, because, you know, we had the January 6th investigation. We've had this raid on the former president's home. The political rhetoric is almost at 11 when it's been at 10 for several years. Are these fears of a threat of democracy to America's democracy and republic founded, or is it the media as well feeding this?
No, I think the fears are founded. You know, I've been in Washington a long time. As you mentioned, at CNN, not only was bureau chief, but I covered the White House for many, many years. And the presidency as a student of history. We've had many times in our country where we've faced crisis and faced challenge. But what we see now with the crisis and the challenge emanating from the then current president, now former President Trump, from the top, where we see a major political party embracing the falsehoods and the lies and the conspiracies and promoting candidates who traffic in those sorts of things, where we see this kind of back story of threat and violence. These are extraordinary developments and something to be very concerned about. I don't think the country is about to just flat out fall apart or fall into civil war. But I do think that we are entering a very dangerous, perilous, uncertain time, and we don't know how it's going to turn out.
Entering in what way? Because the midterms coming up and the presidential in 2024, do you see these next 2 years as critical, or do you think you can't put a date on it?
Yes. And all those things you were talking about, they're coming to a head. Right. The Mar-a-Lago search, the candidates who are standing for election and promoting the lies and the suspicions, the continuing undermining of confidence and faith in the fundamental institutions of this country, the collapse of trust that people express for the Supreme Court. These are all very troubling things, and they're moving side by side in parallel very quickly. And I think they will first define themselves around the midterm elections. That's the first place that we're going to be looking to see how this expresses itself. And then, of course, the presidential field and 2024, 2 years from now.
Craig Shirley, you're no stranger to Washington politics. You've had a lot of influence through your books, but also you're well known about town, a committed Reaganite. Do you see a big difference from those days? And can we point the finger squarely at the former president, who, let's face it, is under investigation in so many places now, I can't list them all?
Well, let me first say that it's a pleasure to be here, number one.
Thank you.
Number two, my old friend Frank says, no, I'm going to have to disagree with you, Frank. We've had political diatribe and conflict in this country for well over 200 years. In the election of 1800, the supporters of John Adams called Thomas Jefferson a political hermaphrodite with neither the firmness of a man nor the softness of a woman. You can't get any lower than that. We've had political clashes for over 200 years. And look, let's face it, this country has always been divided. Historians will tell you that in the Revolutionary War, something like 30 to 40% of Americans were against American rule. In fact, 100,000 Americans left the United States rather than living under American rule. We were divided, obviously, in the Civil War. They were divided in World War I. Something like 3 dozen congressmen refused to vote to commit U.S. troops to Europe in World War I. The only times we were not divided in this country were in the aftermath of December 7th, 1941, and then we were pretty much united for 4 years, and the aftermath of September 11th, but we were only united for a few months.
I remember those. I remember those days. It was only a matter of a few weeks.
We fell into discord.
Yeah.
So the fact is that our strength is in compromise, with both sides battling each other and then finding maneuvering room somewhere in the middle. Sometimes a little bit right, sometimes a little bit left. But that's where we find solutions.
Well, I always like your historical perspective, but unfortunately I'm going to do a journalist on you, Craig Shelley, because, you very much are sort of Reaganite, mourning in America. But
yes.
I just thought maybe we should show a couple of your tweets, because this, to me, sort of epitomizes maybe where the Republican Party is going rhetorically. And, I hope you don't mind this, and I'm going to give you a chance to defend yourself.
Have at it.
Okay, so let me read one. We don't need an FBI anymore. It's outgrown its original mission. State law enforcement agencies can handle law enforcement quite well. The Republican-controlled House can cut off its funding. And then you've got some shorter, snappier ones. We are in a new world now, is your other one. The federal government is now our enemy and we resist. And there's a rhetorical question, is it time for a new American revolution? So, as someone who's a presidential historian, someone who's storied with considered a very intellectual Republican as well, why are you tweeting that? Because it seems a little bit defensive. Or is this, do you have to basically keep your place in the party?
Everything I said is in Republican Party discussion currently and right of center discussion in America. And I think it's a worthy argument about, do we need the FBI or do we need to return to a new form of federalism and rely more on the state-based law enforcement rather than, look, there's no doubt, I don't think anybody would disagree that the FBI has behaved very, very badly, taking congressmen's cell phones and getting suspicious.
But if they've done crimes or potentially crimes, I mean, surely they investigate. That's what the FBI does, right? And sorry, I just want to call you out. Words like resist and new American revolution, they do whip up people, don't they? And even former President Trump has sort of tried to calm it down in the last couple of days. So do you see what I'm saying? The rhetoric, especially on the right, seems to be getting very, very very tense, and we've seen the effects of that.
Yes, by revolution I mean an intellectual discussion between.
Right. Well, revolutions tend to be violent. I think we look at the dictionary. It's not reform. It's the Burkean thing.
The American Revolution was intellectual. Yes, it was violent, but you can have an intellectual. You can also have revolution. Can take many forms. You can have a green revolution. You can have a civil rights revolution. Many revolution takes its form, advances in many forms.
Rina Shah, do you think Craig Shirley's a never Trumper? And do you think that's where the party is? A total pro-Trumper, and that's where the MAGA crowd are all going.
I'm about 50-50. I love his policies. I despise his personal behavior.
Okay. Well, thanks for correcting that, Rina. Can you pick up?
Well, Nathan, as the original Never Trumper, I was the first GOP delegate in 2016 to stand up to then nominee Trump, presumptive nominee when I did it.
Well, do you get a special medal for that? Do you have a T-shirt?
Well, I lost a great deal, I must say. There were no medals. It's actually quite lucrative to be on Team Trump and to be in the Trump world now. I mean, there are people who, look at people like me and say, you were always wrong. You have Trump derangement syndrome. Everything's about Trump to you. And I say, no, it's not like that. To me, this is personal. My family escaped Uganda and we escaped Idi Amin, and we know what it's like. We know what dictators are like. We know what happens when wannabe dictators try to assume office, and then they do. They point out people for things that they can't change. Trump calling Mexicans rapists. I mean, look at my skin color. I'm brown. Where do you think I was going to be dubbed in the Republican Party that was going to elect Trump? I felt that when he became president. I felt everything everything become more hateful, more divisive. And no, it was not always about him. He was not the original problem, right? And that's been discussed many times in many ways. He was a symptom of sort of this already boiling problem. The problem that was that we were othering people in this country, putting people in boxes they didn't want to be put in. And regardless of who you think was the problem, the country has a problem when we can't do it civilly. And that's always been my worry.
Yeah, well, you know, Craig Cheney basically said he's 50-50 and agrees with the policies and not the man. But the evidence seems to be that a lot of people are just behind the man no matter what, because the policies of, let's face it, Donald Trump haven't been necessarily fixed going forward. What does that spell to you about the future of American democracy, if it is indeed a cultish feeling when it comes to the former president?
You know, in general, yes. The cult of personality, as it's been dubbed so many times, was strong because we have not seen a figure like this, somebody who seemed to get loyalty at every twist and turn, no matter what he did, no matter how offensive it felt. But there are so many Republicans I've spoken to over the years who felt very pleased about what the Trump administration put out. And I say to that, of course they did it, because he was surrounded by longtime Republicans, people who believed in these policies that were fiscally conservative, like I still do, but socially conservative as well, which is what the great majority of the party has been in the modern era, pretty socially conservative. So I was called a rhino for a long time, a Republican in name only. And to this, now at this point, I'm definitely called that. But the difference between back then and now is that it felt that there was still a place for me, that the party wanted to grow bigger, wanted to have newer Americans like me, people who are kids of immigrants, people of color, people under 40, things of that sort, all boxes, again, I'm in. But in general, I wanted this innovative, competitive America, and I felt that Republican policies were going to get us there. Now, people say to me, you're not with us on abortion, so you're definitely not with us anymore, and you're not with us on Trump, so again, you're definitely not with us. What are you doing in this party? And again, I didn't leave the Republican Party, it left me.
Gene Rossi, thanks for being so patient. As a former prosecutor, where do you see the threats to democracy, and do you think it's actually real, and what sort of timeline are we looking at? Because we've seen an amazing primary season where some people with perhaps question marks that they would have had in former races seem to be elected to positions of authority over even the electoral process.
Well, I'm going to answer your question globally as a former career prosecutor with the Justice Department. What I see is a smoldering of venom and hatred, not just on the Republican side, but also a little bit on the Democratic side. Some of the Democratic groups I don't agree with. But I got to stress this. As long as the Republican Party, led by Donald Trump, is perceived as a vile, angry, 10-to-violence core support and base, he will never be president again. Because I want to compliment Craig Shirley, okay? And I brought his book.
We're getting a plug, Craig.
Thank you.
I want to compliment him. I'll tell you why.
Did money exchange hands before this?
I'll tell you why.
Yeah, but it was
in 1984, I proudly worked on the Mondale Ferrero campaign. We got our clock clean.
You did, yes.
Clean. We almost lost Minnesota, where Walter Mondale was from. And the reason I mention this is this. When Ronald Reagan ran in '76, I'm a Democrat talking like this. When Ronald Reagan ran in '76, he didn't talk about violence and...
Well, it was Morning in America, exactly.
It was morning. Well, he did it in a way that brought people in. And in 1980, he did it in a way that brought people in. He included people with his jovialness, but he did it in a way that he won people over with his, not just his personality, but with the way he conveyed his views on policy. Trump is the antithesis of Ronald Reagan, and he will never be president again. And he cannot get over that fact. But for the Justice Department, I want to end with this.
Okay.
What breaks my heart is people who want to kill FBI agents. One of the greatest honors I've ever had is in 2016, I got the first Career Achievement Award from the FBI Washington field office for a prosecutor. They are not perfect, but I worked with some great FBI agents, and they are my family.
Well, this is the trust in the institutions thing, which of course can be extremely negative towards democracy. Frank, I'm going to come to you next, but I want to play, obviously, a clip from perhaps the biggest nemesis to Donald Trump at the moment, and that's Liz Cheney, who, until just a week or two ago, were basically in the same party and a voting record which basically backed him 100%. But obviously, the January 6th committee, her standing against the Republican leadership. Let's take a listen. I want to get your reaction off the back to whether this is actually a sign of a vigorous democracy or not.
I was ashamed to hear Republicans immediately and reflexively attack the FBI agents who executed the search warrant. I, was disgusted when I learned that President Trump had released the names of those agents when he released the unredacted search warrant, and that has now caused violence. We've seen threats of violence. The judge himself, his synagogue had to cancel services because of threats of violence. This is a really dangerous moment.
Frank, your reaction to that and what Liz Cheney means for democracy, because it's a brave stance to take within a party that seems to be increasingly just focused on one man.
Well, in some cases, it shows the vibrancy of American democracy. You're quite right. Back to what Craig was saying, we've always had a contentious and sometimes really nasty political stage on which these folks strut. But that Liz Cheney can say these things, that she has access to media, and that these comments are as public as they are. She's sort of playing the role of Howard Baker during the Richard Nixon times. Howard Baker, influential Republican senator who stood up and said, what did you know and when did you know it? The difference is she's all but alone now. The difference is that so few in the party express any kind of agreement or shock at what's going on and have signed on. So what we've got in the United States right now is a really interesting, I say this as a journalist, disturbing as a citizen, but an interesting moment where we've got all kinds of contradictory forces and trends. And Liz Cheney is probably the poster child for that in many ways. Super conservative, super Republican woman from a super Republican, super conservative family, a dynasty in her state, really. Dick Cheney, former vice president.
Yes, who would have believed that Democrats would have been cheering for Cheney just a couple of months ago, yeah.
Yeah, you hear him say, she's a hero. You say, what? but where America's democracy is right now, it's angry, it's polarized, it's deeply, deeply divided. It is nastier and harsher than it's been. I've heard all these, folks are here on our panel talking about Ronald Reagan. Well, I covered his presidency when I was with the AP and then with CNN. Spent a lot of time with Reagan. He had this thing called the 11th Commandment, for example. Thou shalt not attack another Republican. Donald Trump has made, a sport of attacking other Republicans, and it's that divisiveness, that constant sense of, frankly, being at war with his own citizens, many in his own party, that is what sets us apart right now and makes this such a perilous time.
Craig Shirley, I'm going to come back to you because I really enjoyed your historical analysis, and I'm no professional historian, although I'm a big fan of history, so I'm going to have a go. You said essentially, paraphrasing, is that the US has always had these bumps in the road and rhetoric, etc., but it's also had a civil war. And the tensions and the threats of violence have reminded some, especially those of us who, look outside. Even though we live here, we're foreigners. We look at what used to be the shining city on a hill. Sorry, I'm going to quote Reagan over and over again. And there seems to be something more rotten in the state of Denmark, if you like. And do you see the parallels to a slide between your essentially not one nation, but two talking at each other more and more violently?
I think there's some evidence out there that would suggest the United States is slowly breaking up. Look, this has happened before in our history over 200 years where states have moved around. Heck, an entire
not often, no.
left. left the United States because they disagreed. Of course, they were wrong, obviously, but the entire region left the United States over policies. So I think it's possible in the future. I'm just looking, into the future, 20, 30, 40 years. Parts of Oregon want to secede and join Idaho. Staten Island wants to leave New York and join Florida. Yeah, I know. It seems ludicrous.
I was just thinking of what Miami would do with Staten Island, but anyway, carry on.
Well, they'd have, cheap hot dogs, I guess, or something. But these things, I mean, I do think about these things. One thing I do want to say, by the way, you mentioned Morning in America. Morning in America was 1984, and I want to thank the other gentleman for him praising my book. Look, the times have changed. Nothing is static. Nothing remains the same. Yes, Reagan went after what were Democrats in the 1976 campaign, who later became known as Reagan Democrats. Right. And there were actually Obama Republicans. Something like 11% of Republicans voted for Barack Obama. So nothing is static. Nothing stays the same. Everything changes.
And I guess can I just follow up, though? Because can I just follow up? Because I was there on January 6th during the insurrection outside the Capitol, and, I'd covered the Tea Party movement and obviously, a lot of opposition, I'll put it politely, to Barack Obama's first run, for example. But I've never seen stuff like this. And, this is a dangerous moment, especially as we're sort of peeling back the onion and realizing just how many violent groups were sort of involved, and it wasn't some sort of spontaneous demonstration.
Hold on a second. Back in the early 1800s, there was the anti-Masonic Party, and there was a lot of violence and killing done to members of, believe it or not, members of the Masonic Party, simply for being Masons, because it was a paranoid society back then, and there were Masonic halls burned and Masons killed. So it happens all the time in the history of the United States. It has happened.
So you think this is normal? You think this is normal?
Prohibition, during the fight over women's suffrage, every step along the way, there's been always an argument and some degree of violence.
Yeah, look, I understand that. If you can look at the Ku Klux Klan, for example, and they're reforming after the First World War, and and the Jim Crow era, absolutely. But isn't there meant to be an arc in history? And are you worried that arc is being reversed, and essentially this is real trouble? I just don't get a sense of alarm from you, and I understand you're a historian, but this is your party, a lot of it.
Yes. Yeah, no, I'm not alarmed about it, except that to the degree that it's been personalized by Donald Trump. Even when Reagan was elected in 1980, it was still an ideological movement. It wasn't a cult of personality around Reagan, although he became a very liked, very much revered figure later by the Republican Party, earlier by the conservative movement.
Well, history seems intensely kind to American presidents and their legacy. Sorry, we don't have a lot of time. Rina Shah, I just want to say, are you alarmed a little bit about Craig Shirley's sort of, well, this happens all the time? Because a lot of Republicans out there privately say they are alarmed.
I'm not surprised at all by comments that this doesn't cause any kind of fear or concern. Yes, there is a degree of personalization that should cause concern, but what I feel is that there are a great many Republicans out there who haven't felt the personal pain that people like I have felt when we've spoken up and stood up, showed out, and tried to at least ring the alarm about the policies that are not in line with American norms and traditions, by the way. Let's talk about that for a moment. I mean, there's no question that slavery is the original sin in this country, and that there's still a deep streak of racism throughout the nation. But what I felt through the Trump era is this division based on color and on creed. And if you weren't somebody that fit into sort of this Christian evangelical box and you were in the Republican Party, again, there was a sense of, why are you here? You don't need to be here. We'll force you out because you're not one of us. We are inherently tribal as people, no doubt. Why I still want to align with this party? Look, my answer is different to that question every day. Right. But I'll say this, is that I think that the country and our democracy demands at least a healthy two-party system. We don't have a multi-party system that's real here. So at least we need two healthy parties. And I see the Republican Party is not healthy. When they were trying to be a bigger tent party, in my most formative time on the Hill, I was on Capitol Hill for a few years, 2008 onwards, and I enjoyed my time working for two Republican members of Congress. Though I was not with them on the social stuff, I never heard the sort of the underlying streak of violence is okay, and that this division, this increasing division is okay. We were always trying to come back somewhere to the middle and at least to some uniting principles. Now it feels that the party's off the rails. And so in general, what I really think needs to happen is that Trumpism needs to be exterminated. The flames of it need to be fanned out. And that's the only hope for the Republican Party. Until then, it remains on life support. And Republicans like Liz Cheney, who are capable of putting country over party, they will remain in the shadows. And I think there are a great many there.
Well, we're running out of time. Yeah, someone said to me the other day that the Republican Party has gone from a big tent to a big top, which I thought was good, using a circus analogy. Gene Rossi, how does the rule of law protect itself, democracy protect itself? Is it law enforcement doing exactly what they should be doing, by the book, leading by example? Because there's a lot of political pressure, especially after the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago.
Well, what I can say about Merrick Garland, and I was very critical of him in the first year, is that there's no man who is more brilliant than him. And in my humble opinion, I know I'm a little partisan here, there's nobody who's more apolitical in that post than Merrick Garland. And I know from the people I worked with and just working in the Justice Department for almost 3 decades, to approve a search warrant and approve the submission to a judge to search a former president's home, I can tell you the layers of review for that and the amount of probable cause must have been overwhelming. And here's the other thing I want to say. Christopher Wray was handpicked by Donald Trump,
the head of the FBI,
to replace Comey. So a Republican-leaning FBI director approved that ad, if you will. So in terms of the rule of law, I do have faith that we will have a continued vigilance towards the rule of law. And I think all this talk about civil war, I think in 1 or 2 years, it's going to dissipate to a controlled level. And at the end of the day, Donald Trump is going to die on the vine, not literally, but figuratively.
Frank says no last word. Is the media culpable too, and what can we do?
The media is absolutely culpable. The media in all the conspiracy theories and all the controversy, and I love the story of division and polarization and discord, and social media, which is not part of the mainstream media, but feeds into it and plays off of it, is exceptionally culpable, because that is the great accelerator and the great amplifier that sets this time apart. What do we do about it? We have conversations like this. We hear this subject as much as we possibly can. And media, journalists need to be thoughtful, reflective, and understand the role they play and the contributions they sometimes make in this whole equation.
Well, America's watching, the world is watching too. Really important debate. And it was really civil and fun. I really enjoyed it, guys. Thanks so much. That's it for this edition of 8. I'm Nathan King from Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching. See you soon.